Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in Australia, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Miami, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. I turned 72 the day my family forgot me. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, soft and golden, falling on a table set for one. My birthday cake sat untouched, a single candle waiting for a breath that never came. I had baked it myself, foolishly hoping they'd stop by after church, or at least call. The house was too quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the ticking clock that seemed louder than my heartbeat. I poured myself tea and whispered, "Happy birthday, Margaret," just to hear a voice in the room. Funny how life shrinks. Once, I was a woman of purpose, of music, of plans. Now, I was a woman of waiting. But that morning, I didn't know my family had gathered somewhere else, celebrating without me. I saw it by accident. My granddaughter, Lily, had posted a photo on social media, all of them smiling around a big table, balloons in the background. "Happy birthday, Mom," the caption read. My daughter's birthday was next week. They'd mixed the dates, or maybe they just moved on. My throat tightened. The hurt wasn't the party. It was that I wasn't even in the frame of their minds. I stared at that glowing screen until my vision blurred. The same hands that once packed lunches, wiped tears, and clapped at school recitals now trembled over a phone. I wanted to call, to say something, anything. But pride can be heavier than grief. So I just set the phone down and listened to the silence, the same silence that had followed me for years, ever since I gave up everything for them. You see, once upon a time, I was going to be a pianist. I had been accepted into the New England Conservatory, a dream I'd carried since childhood. My father sold his watch to buy me my first piano lessons. But then I met Richard. He was charming, ambitious, said he couldn't imagine life without me. I was 20, naive and head over heels. We married within a year, and before I could blink, I was pregnant. "You can always play again after the baby," he'd said, kissing my forehead. But babies became toddlers, toddlers became school runs, and music became background noise. I traded my grand piano for a kitchen table covered in homework and bills. And I told myself it was worth it because family was supposed to be everything, until I realized that somewhere along the way I had disappeared. That night, after they forgot my birthday, I went to the attic, the only place that still remembered me. The air was thick with dust and nostalgia. In the corner sat my old upright piano, covered with a white sheet like a ghost waiting for release. I pulled it off, and my fingers brushed over the keys. They were colder than I remembered. I played a single note. It cracked like an old memory. I tried again, slower, softer. The melody stumbled out like a story half remembered. I hadn't touched that piano in 20 years, but as I played, tears spilled silently down my cheeks. It wasn't just music. It was me, the woman I had buried under everyone else's dreams. That's when I heard the front door open downstairs. Voices. Laughter. I froze, heart pounding. Could it be Grandma? Lily's voice floated up the stairs. "We thought we'd surprise you." Behind her came my daughter, my son-in-law, even Richard holding flowers. My throat went dry. We were celebrating at Helen's and the kids," she started, but her words faded as she saw the piano. I sat there, trembling, hands still on the keys. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with realization, the kind that hurts more than apologies. Then Lily whispered, "Grandma, I didn't know you could play." The room felt small, fragile, like one breath could break it. I smiled barely. "There's a lot you don't know about me, sweetheart." The truth was out now, humming in the air between us. That night, for the first time in years, they saw not just Grandma, but Margaret. And as I closed the piano, I knew this story was only beginning. When I closed my eyes that night, I could still feel the weight of the piano keys beneath my fingers, familiar but foreign, like touching an old photograph come to life. The sound had awakened something I thought was long gone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of applause that once followed me. My mind drifted back to 1969, a time of dreams and daring, when my heart beat faster than reason. I was 19, living in a small apartment above a bakery in Boston, the smell of bread and rain forever mixed in my memory. I'd been accepted to the conservatory, and every day I'd walk past the grand building, my fingers twitching with anticipation. That girl, the one who believed she could change the world through music. She felt so alive. I wonder when she died. I met Richard that spring. He was tall, confident, and always carried the scent of aftershave and promises. I remember him standing outside the coffee shop near campus, grinning at me like he already knew our story. "You look like trouble," he said. I laughed. I was trouble back then, or so I liked to believe. He'd watch me practice through the glass, leaning against the lamppost, waiting until I finished. We'd walk to the harbor afterward, talking about futures that hadn't yet been written. He said he wanted to start a business, buy a home, raise a family. I said I wanted to travel, perform, play in concert halls. "We'll make it work," he'd say. "You can have all of that, and me too." I wanted to believe him. Love has a way of making every sacrifice look like a fair trade, until the bill comes due. Our wedding was small, just family, flowers, and a piano I didn't get to play. The same week, I got my first letter from the conservatory asking if I'd accept my scholarship. I remember holding that envelope while Richard unpacked our suitcases in the tiny house he just rented. "There'll be time later," he told me, wrapping his arms around me. "Let's build us first." So I wrote them back and declined. I told myself I was choosing love over ambition. But deep down, I knew I was already rewriting my story to fit his. The months turned into years. Richard worked late, trying to build his company, and I worked harder to be the perfect wife. Cooking, cleaning, learning how to stretch dollars in silence. Then, when our first daughter, Helen, came along, I let go of the last piece of that other life. I didn't even notice when the music stopped. I remember one rainy night when Helen was a toddler. The storm had knocked the power out, and she was scared of the thunder. I pulled her close and hummed an old lullaby I used to play. She fell asleep with her tiny hand clutching my blouse, her breath warm on my chest. That night, as the rain drummed against the windows, I whispered to myself, "This is what love sounds like now." I truly believed it. I believed that my sacrifice was holy, that giving everything for family was the right kind of dream. But dreams don't die quietly. They haunt you, in the sound of wind, in the ache of quiet nights, in the music you hear in other people's lives. And sometimes they wait decades for you to remember them. When I woke the next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, and I saw the piano downstairs, uncovered. Someone had left a small note on it. "Play something for us next time, Grandma." Lily's handwriting. My heart fluttered and ached all at once. I ran my fingers along the edges of that note, remembering how once my father had left a similar message on my music sheets. "Never stop playing, Maggie. Never stop being you." Somewhere between those two notes, one from a man who believed in me, one from a child who barely knew me, was the bridge between the girl I used to be and the woman I became. I wasn't sure which side I'd stand on next, but I knew one thing. I was done being forgotten. It was the summer of 1974 when Richard came home carrying a briefcase and a storm behind his eyes. I was setting the table for dinner, chicken stew, his favorite, when he said, "Maggie, I got an offer. A real one, but it means moving, and we'll need every penny we've got to make it work." I looked up from the table, my hand still holding the napkins I'd been folding. "Where to?" I asked. "Detroit," he said. "There's opportunity there. But it'll take time, and, well, you'll need to handle things here for a while." I didn't argue. I just nodded, the way good wives were taught to do. I remember watching him eat that night, talking about numbers and dreams, and realizing I'd just traded mine away without a single protest. That same week, I was offered a small teaching position at the local music school. It wasn't the stage, but it was something. When I told Richard, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Maybe later, Maggie. Let's get settled first." Maybe later. Those two words became the bars of a quiet prison I built myself. I told my friends I was too busy, that family came first. I told myself love was worth the wait. But love, I learned, doesn't always remember the promises it makes. As months turned into years, the piano keys gathered dust. Helen started school. Richard's business grew. And I began to fade, not suddenly, but slowly, like a song being played one last time before silence takes over. There was one evening, I still see it clear as yesterday, when I sat at the piano after everyone had gone to bed. I played Clair de Lune, quietly, afraid to wake them. I played like my life depended on it. Halfway through, I heard footsteps. Richard stood at the doorway, tie loosened, eyes tired. "You still up?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You're good, you know. But maybe not tonight, okay? Big day tomorrow." And just like that, he turned away. I stopped playing mid-note. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat there staring at my reflection on the piano's glossy lid. A woman who looked like me, but no longer felt like me. That night, I promised myself I'd never play again until someone truly wanted to listen. Years rolled by, and my promise held like an invisible chain. Richard's company flourished. We moved into a bigger house, had another child, Paul. The house grew louder, the laughter richer, the noise constant. Yet, somehow I felt lonelier than ever. I was surrounded by the very life I'd prayed for, and yet I felt like a ghost haunting my own story. Sometimes, when I'd tuck Helen and Paul into bed, they'd ask for a song. I'd hum instead of play, afraid that if I touched those keys, I'd unravel everything I'd built. I told myself I was protecting them, but in truth, I was protecting my pain. Because if I played, I'd have to remember who I once was. And I wasn't sure that woman would forgive me. The years blurred, and the seasons folded over one another like pages in a forgotten book. Then, one winter morning, as I packed away Christmas ornaments, I found an old photograph, me at 19, standing on the conservatory steps, sheet music in hand, eyes burning with promise. I sat on the floor, holding that photo to my chest, and whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't even know who I was apologizing to, the girl I'd been, or the woman I'd become. Somewhere in that quiet apology, I realized something. I had been waiting all my life for permission to live again. Maybe the person who needed to grant it was me. By the time the children reached high school, Richard and I spoke in schedules, not sentences. Dinners at 6. Helen's recital at 8. Paul's science fair Saturday. Those words filled the air where laughter used to live. I sometimes caught him staring at his phone even while I talked. I'd stop mid-sentence, waiting for him to look up, but he never did. One night, I finally asked, "Do you still hear me when I talk, Richard?" He didn't look up. He just sighed, "Maggie, please not tonight. I'm tired." That's the thing about silence. It doesn't happen all at once. It grows slowly, like ivy, until it covers everything. Soon, we were strangers sharing a roof built from old promises and unspoken regrets. I started to bake more. It sounds silly, but kneading dough was the only time my hands didn't tremble. Flour became my comfort, sugar my company. I'd hum to myself, quiet, unfinished songs from another life. One afternoon, Helen came into the kitchen. She was 16, full of fire. "Mom," she said, "why don't you ever go out? Don't you get bored?" I smiled. "This is where I'm needed." She frowned. "You're always here." Then she left. Her words stung more than she could know. That night, as the family watched TV, I sat on the piano bench in the dark, my fingers hovering over the keys, but I couldn't press them down. My own home had become a museum, and I was the exhibit no one came to see anymore. Richard began coming home later. Business dinners, client meetings, at least, that's what he said. I never questioned him. Maybe I didn't want the truth. Maybe I was afraid of what silence had given room to grow. One evening, I noticed lipstick on his collar, not my shade, not even close. He saw me notice, and for a brief second, guilt flashed in his eyes. "It's nothing," he said, brushing it off. "Just a hug from a coworker." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. But that night, as he slept beside me, I turned away, tears soaking into the pillow. I wasn't crying because he might have lied. I was crying because somewhere along the line, I'd stopped being the woman he could tell the truth to. Helen left for college soon after, and the house felt emptier than I'd ever imagined. Paul was still home, but he was a quiet boy, lost in his books. The walls echoed with absence. I'd find myself cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, cooking meals for people who'd already left the table. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window at night and barely recognize myself, a woman whose life had become background noise in her own home. I wanted to scream, to demand that someone see me, but my voice felt too small, too late. I had built this silence, brick by brick, every time I chose peace over truth. Now, it was the only language I knew. One rainy evening, I sat by the window watching the drops race down the glass. The house smelled of rosemary and regret. Richard came in quietly, set his briefcase down, and for the first time in years he looked at me, really looked at me. "You okay, Maggie?" he asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I was breaking. But instead, I smiled the way old habits teach you to. "I'm fine," I whispered. He nodded and walked away. When the door to his study clicked shut, I closed my eyes and whispered to the rain, "I miss being missed." The thunder outside answered me with the kind of honesty no human voice had given me in years. It was a Thursday morning in late autumn when the truth first brushed against me. Quiet as dust, sharp as glass. The air smelled of damp leaves, and the house was still except for the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I was cleaning Richard's study, something I rarely did. He hated anyone touching his papers, but he'd left early for a trip, and the room had begun to gather cobwebs and stale air. The window creaked open with a reluctant sigh, and a gust of cold air scattered the documents across his desk. That's when I saw it, a yellowed envelope tucked beneath a ledger, the edges softened by time. My name wasn't on it. It was addressed to Elena Whitmore. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the shape of the letters— oh, I knew them. They were Richard's. I should have stopped there. I should have put it back, closed the window, and walked away. But something deep inside me, that same quiet ache that had lived in my chest for years, told me I had to know. I sat down at his desk, hands trembling, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 15 years ago. My eyes moved slowly across the page, reading words I could hardly process. "I think of you every day," it said. "You and our little girl." My breath caught. Our little girl. I read the line again and again, as if repetition could change its meaning. The ink had faded, but the betrayal glowed fresh, alive. A love affair. A child. A secret life that had been breathing beside mine all these years unseen. I pressed the letter to my chest and just sat there, feeling my pulse race beneath the paper. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. How long had he carried this? Was he still in touch? Then came the deeper cut. Did he love her more than he ever loved me? I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up making sure his world kept turning. All the times I'd silenced my own dreams so his could grow wings. And yet, behind that curtain of devotion, he'd been living another story, one I was never invited to read. I folded the letter carefully, as though even its deceit deserved tenderness, and slid it into my apron pocket. The sound of it, there was like a heartbeat I could no longer trust. That night, I made dinner as usual. Roast chicken, rosemary, and potatoes, his favorite. My hands moved mechanically like someone else's. When Richard came home, he kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and went upstairs to change. I watched him climb the staircase, wondering how many lies those hands had written, how many times his heart had split itself in two. At dinner, he spoke about his trip, numbers, meetings, laughter that didn't reach his eyes. I smiled, nodded, and poured him wine, every gesture rehearsed, flawless. Inside, though, a quiet decision had already formed. I would not confront him tonight. Not yet. I wanted to see how deep his silence ran, how far he'd go before realizing I already knew. After he'd gone to bed, I slipped back into the study. I opened the drawer beneath his desk and searched. There, tucked behind a photo frame of our family, was another envelope, smaller, newer. My name was on this one. My heart stuttered. I opened it, expecting confession, but instead found an old photograph, a little girl with soft brown hair and Richard's eyes. On the back he had written, "For the life I couldn't give you, forgive me." My knees buckled. I sank to the floor, clutching that picture like a piece of broken truth. The clock struck midnight. In that sound I felt something close inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but strength. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of silence. I was listening to what it had been trying to tell me all along. For 3 nights after I found that photograph, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, that little girl with Richard's eyes and the same shy tilt of her smile he once said he loved in me. I kept the photo tucked inside my pillowcase, as if sleeping near it would help me understand. When morning came, I'd press it flat on the table, tracing the edges like a map to a place I wasn't supposed to find. I told myself I didn't want to know, that the past couldn't hurt me anymore. But I was lying, not to him, not to anyone else, just to myself. Because the truth was I needed to know. I needed to see the shape of the woman I'd been sharing my husband with all those years. The envelope had a faint return address, half smeared, but I could make out the town name, Waverly Creek, a small place a few hours away. I told Richard the First was visiting Helen for the weekend, kissed him goodbye like I always did, and packed a small bag. The drive was long and gray. The countryside rolled past in shades of autumn, trees shedding what they no longer needed. I thought about how strange it was that nature knew when to let go, yet I'd spent my whole life clinging to what was breaking me. When I reached Waverly Creek, it looked like a place time had forgotten. A single main street, a diner, a church, and a graveyard that leaned into the hill. I parked outside the post office and sat for a long time, the letter trembling in my hand, as if the truth itself was waiting just behind the door. Inside the post office, an older clerk greeted me kindly. "You looking for someone?" she asked, noticing the photo I held. "I'm not sure," I replied softly. "Do you know an Elena Whitmore?" Her expression changed, recognition, hesitation, then sadness. "Oh, honey," she said. "Elena passed a few years back. Cancer, I think. She had a daughter, sweet girl. Lives with her aunt, now out near the old church road." My heart pounded. "Do you know her name?" "Anna," she said. "Anna Whitmore." The name clung to the air like music. I thanked her, left, and sat in my car staring at the photo again. The little girl, Anna. My husband's daughter. His secret. My silence finally had a face, and it was innocent. I found the house the clerk had mentioned. A small white cottage with peeling paint and a garden overrun with wildflowers. A young woman was kneeling by the porch, tending to the plants. She looked up as I approached, her features a blend of familiarity and ache. "Can I help you?" she asked, wiping dirt from her hands. I knew your mother," I said, voice trembling. "A long time ago." She smiled politely, cautious but kind. She didn't talk much about the past. I nodded, the photograph burning in my pocket. "Sometimes the past talks, whether we want it to or not," I whispered. She tilted her head, studying me. "You look like someone who's lost something," she said softly. I almost laughed, the kind of laugh that catches between tears. "Maybe I finally found it," I replied. We talked for an hour on that porch. She told me about her mother, strong, gentle, always sick but always smiling. I told her about gardening, music, and how grief changes shape over time. When I left, she hugged me, not knowing the storm inside me. Driving home, I felt the strangest peace, a quiet between guilt and love. That night, when Richard came to bed, I lay beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing. He had no idea I'd met her. No idea his two worlds had brushed hands in the sunlight. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized I held a truth he didn't. Not to hurt him, not to punish him, but to remember. Myself. Because after all the sacrifices, after all the silence, I finally had something that was mine. The power to decide what came next. It was raining again the night I decided to tell him. The kind of rain that hums against the windows like an old song you can't unhear. Richard was in his study, reading the newspaper, glasses perched low on his nose. I stood in the doorway, watching him the way you might watch a ghost, someone familiar but no longer the same. "Richard," I said softly. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Maggie, you're up late." My hands trembled around the folded letter in my pocket. "There's something I need to ask you." He nodded absently, still half-reading. I took a deep breath and placed the photograph on his desk. The moment his eyes landed on it, the color drained from his face. The paper rustled between us like thunder. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. And just like that, the years of quiet between us shattered. "I found it," I said, "in your desk, along with a letter." He closed his eyes, pressing his fingers to his forehead. "Maggie, please!" "No," I interrupted, my voice trembling but steady. "You don't get to hush me this time." He looked up at me, helpless, cornered by the truth. "It was years ago," he said. "Before the promotion, before the house. I made a mistake." I stared at him. "A mistake?" "You had a child, Richard." The word child hung heavy between us. He looked down, voice cracking. "Elena was sick. I sent money, tried to help quietly. I thought I was protecting you." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Protecting me? You protected your image. You protected your comfort. You didn't protect me. You erased me." His eyes filled with tears, but mine were dry. I had cried enough for a lifetime. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked, the rain whispered. "Does she know?" I asked finally. "Does she know who her father is?" He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. I turned toward the window, watching lightning flash across the sky. "I met her," I said quietly. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You what?" "Her name is Anna," I said. "She has your eyes." His breath caught. "You shouldn't have—" "Shouldn't have what, Richard?" "Known the truth about my own life." I faced him now. "I gave up my dreams so this family could shine. And while I was patching holes in our roof, you were building another home I didn't know existed." He covered his face with his hands. "Maggie, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "No, Richard. You're sorry you were found out." He followed me into the kitchen, desperation heavy in his voice. "It wasn't love," he said. "I swear it wasn't. It was complicated. I was lonely. You were busy with the children. And—" I turned on him sharply. "Don't you dare blame my devotion for your betrayal." The thunder cracked outside, as if agreeing with me. I leaned against the counter, exhausted. "You know what hurts most?" I whispered. "Not the affair. Not even the child. It's that you looked at me every day for 15 years and said nothing. You let me believe we were still building something together." His voice broke. I didn't know how. "You did," I said. "You just chose not to." The kitchen light flickered, casting shadows on his face. The man I once loved, now a stranger shaped by secrets. When the storm quieted, I walked past him toward the stairs. "Maggie," he called, voice soft. "What now?" I paused at the doorway. "Now," I said. "I remember who I was before all this." He looked lost. "Are you leaving me?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "You already did years ago. I'm just finally catching up." Upstairs, I sat on the edge of our bed, the house silent again. But this time the silence wasn't his, it was mine. It was strength. Downstairs, I could hear him weeping softly, and for the first time, I didn't rush to comfort him. Some lessons must be learned alone. I turned off the lamp, closed my eyes, and whispered to the darkness. Tomorrow I start remembering me. I didn't leave him. I thought I would. I even packed a small suitcase one morning, filled with only what was mine. A faded scarf, a few music sheets, and the old photograph of me on stage, smiling under the lights. But when I looked at the house, the chipped banister, the dent in the kitchen door from when Helen learned to walk, I realized I didn't want to leave the life I had built. I wanted to reclaim it, so instead I stayed. But I changed the rules. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped pretending everything was fine. Most of all, I stopped apologizing for wanting more. Richard noticed, of course. He started making small efforts, morning coffee waiting for me, little notes on the counter. But the gesture that mattered most wasn't his. It was mine the day I opened the piano again. It had been years since I touched those keys. Dust lay thick on them, like time's own regret. My fingers trembled as I pressed the first note, soft, unsure, but real. The sound filled the room, unsteady but alive. I began to play the song I once wrote before the children came, before marriage turned my music into quiet chores. The melody came back slowly, like an old friend returning after too long away. When I finished, tears streaked my face, not from sadness but release. I wasn't just playing music. I was remembering the woman I'd been, the girl who once dreamed of composing scores for films, of hearing her name whispered in concert halls. That night, I played until dawn, the piano weeping and laughing with me. Richard stood in the doorway, watching silently, not daring to interrupt. As the months passed, I filled the house with sound again. I joined a small music group in town, teaching young mothers to play piano for the first time. It was strange, being surrounded by laughter and curiosity again. One of them, a young woman named Clara, asked me one evening, "Why did you stop playing for so long?" I smiled sadly. "Because I thought silence was love," I said. "I thought giving everything away made me good. Turns out, it just made me disappear." They didn't know what to say, but their eyes softened. That night, walking home under the autumn sky, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about erasing pain. It's about no longer letting it own you. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole, even if I was still healing. Richard tried in small ways to reach me. He'd sit beside me as I played, sometimes humming quietly, sometimes saying nothing at all. He started volunteering at the local shelter, something he'd never done before. I could tell he was trying to become the man he'd once pretended to be. One evening, as I watered the garden, he came to me with trembling hands. "I told her," he said softly. I turned. "Told who?" "Anna," he said. "I told her the truth, that I'm her father." My heart twisted, and "She forgave me," he said. "She wants to meet you properly if you'll let her." I didn't answer right away. The soil beneath my feet was damp and real. The air smelled of earth and rain. Finally, I nodded. "Not yet," I said, "but one day." He smiled faintly. It was the first honest smile between us in years. By winter, the piano wasn't just music anymore. It was memory, forgiveness, and strength all woven into sound. Helen came home for Christmas, and as we sat by the fire, she said, "Mom, you seem lighter." I laughed softly. Maybe I finally remembered how to breathe. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window watching snow fall across the yard. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be. But perfection was never the goal. Peace was. I looked at Richard, asleep on the couch, aging and fragile, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who betrayed me. I saw the man who was trying, one broken piece at a time, to come home. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let him. It was a gray morning when she came. The kind of day when the clouds hang low, and even the air feels heavy with things unspoken. I had baked a pie, out of habit, not hospitality. My hands moved through the motions as my heart beat faster than it had in years. I didn't know what I'd say when she arrived. Would I be cruel, cold, or would I crumble the moment I saw her face? The knock came softly, almost apologetically. When I opened the door, there she stood, Anna. She looked like him, but softer somehow. Her hair the same brown, her eyes uncertain, kind. For a long time, we just stared at each other, two women bound by one man's choices, by silence, by the ache of what never should have been. Then she spoke. Mrs. Lane, I didn't come to hurt you. I just wanted to meet you. Her voice was trembling. I felt something inside me break, not in pain, but in release. I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She hesitated, then walked slowly across the threshold, as if afraid she didn't belong. Would you like some tea? I asked quietly. She nodded, eyes glassy. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Richard and I had eaten 1,000 dinners in silence. The air between us was fragile, every sound too loud. Finally, I said, You look like him. She smiled faintly. I get that a lot. How much did you know? I asked. She looked down. Everything, but not from him. My mother told me before she died. She said he loved me, but he belonged somewhere else. My throat tightened. Did he? I whispered. She hesitated. Maybe once. But I think he loved you differently. The kind of love that lasts, even when it breaks. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything. About her childhood, her mother's laughter, the piano lessons she never finished. She told me she used to imagine what her father's real family was like. I thought maybe you'd hate me, she admitted. I sighed. I did for a while. I hated everything that reminded me of what I lost. But hate is heavy, Anna. It's a weight you carry until you forget how to stand. Tears slid down her cheeks, and before I realized it, I had reached across the table and held her hand. Her skin was warm, trembling. In that touch, I felt something shift, like a lock turning quietly in my chest. She wasn't my enemy. She was the echo of a mistake that had already been paid for 1,000 times over. You didn't take anything from me, I said softly. Life just happened to both of us. When Richard came home that afternoon, the sight of us, nearly stopped his breath. He stood frozen in the doorway, grocery bag in hand, eyes wide and wet. For a moment, no one moved. Then Anna turned and said, Hi, Dad. He dropped the bag, apples rolling across the floor. Anna, he whispered, his voice cracking like old wood. He stepped forward slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he got too close. When their arms met, he sobbed, not the restrained kind of crying men do when they're ashamed, but the deep, soul-torn weeping of someone finally free of his own lies. I turned away, my hands shaking. I didn't know if it was relief or heartbreak that filled me. Maybe both. But as I looked at them, father and daughter, strangers made family by forgiveness, I realized the ache in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was peace trying to bloom. As the sun dipped low, Anna stood to leave. She hugged me before she went, gently as though afraid I might break. Thank you, she whispered, for letting me be here. I nodded, too full to speak. After she left, Richard sat beside me, eyes red, voice raw. You didn't have to let that happen, he said. I know, I replied, but I needed to. We sat in silence for a while, the house filled with the faint smell of apple pie and rain. Do you hate me? He asked finally. I turned to him, the man who had built me up, broken me down, and somehow still shared the same air after 50 years. No, I said. I just finally see you for who you are, and maybe that's enough. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in decades I didn't pull away. It had been years since I touched the piano. Dust lay thick on its lid, the keys yellowed with time. After Anna's visit, something inside me kept whispering, a sound I hadn't heard in decades. A melody, soft at first, then insistent. That afternoon, when the house was quiet and the light came slanting through the curtains, I opened the lid. The smell of polished wood and old dreams filled the air. I sat down slowly, my fingers trembling above the keys. For a moment, I couldn't remember where to begin. But then muscle memory took over, and the first notes spilled out like tears. The sound was fragile, wobbly, but it was mine. The song I had once written for Richard when we were young, before bills and babies and lies. I closed my eyes and played, not for him, not for them, but for the girl I used to be. Halfway through the melody, I heard the door open. Footsteps. I didn't turn. Richard's voice came softly, breaking like the music between my fingers. I remember that one. I kept playing. "You should," I said quietly. "It was yours." He walked closer, his shadow falling over the keys. "I don't deserve to hear it again." "Maybe not," I whispered, "but I need to play it anyway." For a while, neither of us spoke. Just the sound of the piano, a conversation too old for words. When I finally stopped, he stood behind me, tears in his eyes. "I wasted so much of what you gave me," he said. "I spent my life chasing things that never filled me." I looked up at him and smiled a small, tired smile. "Then stop running, Richard. Sit. Listen. Let it fill you now." He sat beside me, and we finished the song together in silence. Days turned into weeks. Anna began visiting sometimes on Sundays. She'd bring flowers or photos of her children, calling me Miss Maggie in that shy way of hers. My own children started calling more often, too, as if some invisible current had changed course. One evening, my eldest daughter found me at the piano and said, "I didn't even know you could play like that." I laughed softly. "You used to fall asleep to it every night." She frowned. I guess I was too young to remember. There was no anger in her voice, just a kind of wonder. That moment, that simple acknowledgement, healed something I didn't know was still broken. I realized then that I hadn't really wanted applause. I just wanted to be seen. And maybe after all these years, I finally was. Winter came, slow and gentle. Richard's health declined, as time does what time always does. But something between us had softened. He started sitting by the window in the mornings, listening as I played. Sometimes he'd hum along, his voice shaky but tender. Once he said, "You should have kept playing, Maggie." I smiled, eyes on the keys. Maybe I just needed a longer intermission. He chuckled weakly. On the last day of his life, I played for him again the same song. His eyes closed as if in prayer, a faint smile on his lips. When the final note faded, he whispered, "You were the music, Maggie. I just never knew how to listen." That was the last thing he said. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, fingers resting on the keys, feeling the weight of both love and release. Now, years later, when my grandchildren visit, they ask me to play that same song. They call it Grandma's tune. They don't know it carries a lifetime inside it. Dreams deferred, love betrayed, forgiveness found. When I look at them, I see everything I gave up and everything I gained. I once thought I had lost myself to the world, but maybe I was just waiting to return. The music found me again, and through it, I remembered who I was. I forgave him. I forgave myself. That's what love really is, I suppose. Not a fairy tale, but the quiet courage to begin again. So when I sit at the piano now, I don't play for the past. I play for peace. And that, my dear, is how I found my way back home.